new now, but if you're brand new, we've just been taking a look at the science of learning. So my name is Jared. It is lovely to meet you. I'm a teacher turned neuroscientist with a specialty on human learning. That's all I study now, is how do humans learn? And my job is now to bring that back to schools, to teachers, and say, here's what we can do with this. And I've been lucky enough to bring it back to students as well in the last couple of years, telling students, if this is how you learn, what does that mean for you, taking agency over your own learning and thinking? So thank you for hanging out with me and letting me kind of talk about this stuff with you. I find it fascinating and I love this stuff. So what we're going to do in this session is we're going to start to take a look at what we're going to call learning principles. So what is a learning principle? A learning principle is something that's already been what we call translated. Essentially, we can know something about the brain, or we can know something in the classroom, or we can know something from psychology, but until all three of those get tied together, it's not really a learning principle. Like if I know something very cool about the brain, but I can't tell you what that means for third grade math, it ain't a principle, I'm not going to talk about it. So everything we talk about for this next session is going to be what we've called translated, which means this is a nugget that's already made the rounds. So it gives us, it's a good rule of thumb that whatever this is, it's something we can start to play with and really think about. So let's start off, just get our bearings here. So principle number one today, written text and the spoken word do not mix. Now, what does that mean? To understand, I want to play a quick game with you. So I'm going to play you a sound effect. All you've got to do is listen to this sound clip and try your best to follow along. Here we go.
To demonstrate why, let's do a little experiment. In your left ear, I'm going to read the description of a famous literary character, while in your right ear, I'm going to read the description of a different famous literary character. Your job is to try and pay attention to both simultaneously. Here we go. His limbs were in proportion nose and his horseshoe mouth. A small yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries, while the right eye disappeared entirely. His hair was of a lustrous black.
How you doing? Here, I'm going to put you out of your misery there. Did you notice you couldn't
lip, pearly white, chin, and but these luxuriances
couldn't really do it. Why? Why is that so difficult? Well, it turns out when we listen to somebody speak, the first part of our brain to activate are these two big regions here. Now, you can probably guess this is the part of the brain that processes sound. Now, you've got one of these on each side of the brain, so we got enough brain to hear two voices at once. That's not a problem. But if you want to pay attention to what they're saying, the next part of our brain to activate is this little nugget here. And just to be simple, we're going to call this your language area. Now, problem, you've only got one of these. So even though you got enough brain to hear two people speaking simultaneously, if you want to pay attention, you now have to funnel both of those into this one small spot, and there's just not enough brain to handle it. We hit a neurological bottleneck. You probably noticed you could listen to one voice, then the other becomes noise, or you could switch to this voice, then this one becomes noise, but you can never do both at the same time. We don't have the brain for it. Now, who cares? Why does this matter? Very rarely are we going to teach two at a time, right? Like I'm going to teach you math over here. She's going to teach you science over there. We're going to double your learning, kids. Yay. Like who cares? Nobody does this. Here's where this matters. I'm going to play another quick game with you. On the next slide, I'm going to put up the words to a poem, while at the same time, I'm going to play the audio of me reading a different poem into your speakers. Your job is going to be to read and understand the poem on your screen while listening to and understanding the poem in your ears at the same time. We're going to see what happens. Here we go. Okay. And how'd you do? Now, if you're like most people, that was harder than you thought it would be. But for those of you who thought, no, I did all right, tell me, what were either of those two poems about? You've probably got like a word, happiness, splashing, but you really have no clue what they were about. So wait a second, why was that so dang difficult?
There was no audio.
There was no audio there? Oh, it's because it keeps kicking me out. Oh, I'm sorry. With everyone jumping in, it keeps futzing with my screen. I'm sorry about that. I'll try it again, but now you guys probably got the audio in the first. Try it one more time, but we'll see what happens here.
We don't hear audio.
Still not coming through? Yeah, sorry. No, that's okay. It's on my end. It's Zoom. What are you gonna do? But for our purposes, you can go home, try it tonight. Pop on the TV to a news station while trying to read the newspaper simultaneously. You'll realize you can't do it. Now, why? Why is this so difficult? Well, it turns out when we listen or when we read something, the first part of our brain to activate is this big area here. Now, this is the part of the brain that processes vision. So it makes sense. You're looking at something, you're seeing something cool. But if what you're looking at is text, watch what activates in your brain 150 milliseconds later. Check this out. A question, why would the part of the brain that processes sound activate when you're silently reading? Because what do you hear when you silently read? You hear your own reading voice. And so far as your brain is concerned, your internal reading voice is processed in the exact same way as an out loud speaking voice. When you're reading to yourself, so far as your brain knows, what you're really doing is saying the words, listening to them as they come back into your ear. And once you get this activation here, we get that same bottleneck in the language area. Just like you can't listen to and pay attention to two people speak simultaneously, neither can we read while listening to somebody speak at the same time. The brain simply cannot handle it. Now, interestingly, we don't just hear ourselves, believe it or not. If you're a Morgan Freeman fan and you know of this man right now, y'all would hear his voice. We're incredibly adept at mimicking voices. If I could image your brain right now, it would look as though he were whispering into your ear, which is a dream for some of us, so enjoy it. So that is our first principle for the day. Written text, spoken word, do not mix. We've seen why due to this neurological bottleneck in the brain. We started to experience it psychologically, although the game didn't work, so you might have to experience it tonight. But what does this mean for us in the classroom? Now, I'm sure some of you are already starting to come up with some ideas of how to apply this, and that's good. That's exactly what I want. Once we know more about learning, it gives us new ways to think about things over here. So I'm going to give you some ideas of how teachers in the past have kind of played with this. But just know, man, have fun with this. You don't have to listen. If these ideas don't resonate with you, don't worry about it. You're the expert at teaching. Own that expertise. Take this new learning knowledge, plug it through, filter it through your own expertise, and see what ideas you can come up with. But so in the past, a lot of people would talk, oh, and I should hit this real fast. There is one major caveat for this whole discussion. Written text and spoken word will only clash so long as listening and reading are fluent. When you're new to one of those skills isn't fluent, then bringing the two together won't clash. It will actually be a boost. So let's say I have a kid who's just learning how to read. Still, one of the best ways to teach them how to read is point to a word, say a word. Point to a word, say a word. It's only once reading becomes fluent that we'll start to get that clash. And flip it too, the other way around. Like I'm learning Italian right now, so I can read Italian just fine, but I can't hear it to save my life. I can't parse what they're saying. It's too fast. So the best way for me to hear is to read while I'm listening. But eventually my listening is going to become better and better. And now the two are going to clash and I have to pull the two apart. So the big caveat here is this only matters when the two are fluent. So if you're working with really young kids or second language, this kind of concept goes out the window. But for the most part, we've got this issue of speech and text clashing. What does that mean? I'm sure a lot of you right now are thinking about slides, handout designs. How often do we load handouts or slides with text while I teach over it? And now I've essentially asked you to do the impossible. Have you noticed anything conspicuously lacking from most of my slides? I don't put words on most of my slides. Do you now know why? It's this. Once you have to read, you have to choose between me or the slide. Now, let's say you're teaching a class, and this is secondary school, and with a slide of words behind you. Guess what 90% of your kids, no, I think the number is 95% of your kids will do? Listen to you or read. They're going to read. They're going to block you right out, and they're going to go straight to the board. Why? Because they assume if it's important, you put it up here. Now, this is a problem because it turns out human beings read much faster than other people talk. So they're going to be done reading long before you're done talking about it. And that's when shit hits the, oh, I shouldn't say that, sorry. That's when it really hits the fan. That's when things get bad. We'll take a look why in our next principle, but just now know that when you ask them to do the impossible, things start to go haywire. So we'll come back to that in a second, but for now, just thinking, how are we designing slides, handouts, tools, activities, things like that? What about note-taking? Like human beings, so we can't listen to somebody speak while reading at the same time. Can we write while listening to somebody speak at the same time, or do the two clash? Well, all you got to do is start writing. Go home tonight, start writing something down, pull your attention back. What do you hear when you write? Your own voice. Most of us dictate when we write. And anytime we hear our own voice, we're going to get that same clash here. So just like you can't read and listen, neither can you write while listening at the same time. We don't have the brain for it. Now, here's a trip, though. So if you're writing while I'm talking, you're necessarily going to be missing information coming at you. But we also know that anything you write down, you tend to remember better than things you don't write down. So on one hand, if you're taking notes, you're missing information. But on the other hand, if you're taking notes, whatever you're noting, It's probably going to be better than things you didn't know. So how do we play with this? We got these two different things. What do we do? Hopefully you recognize there is no one answer to this. This is where you get to decide for you, your context, how do you want to play this? It's different for everyone. Some teachers don't care. They're like, I'd rather you take notes on things you care about and miss me. So long as whatever you're doing matters to you, that's fine. Some teachers build notes into the session. So we're going to go for about 15, then we're going to take some notes. We're going to go more, take some notes. If you ever take a class with me at uni, there are no notes during class. We do a group notes at the end. We'll teach and talk for about 45 minutes. In the last 15, we'll say, okay, what was important from today? What do we remember? These are all just different ways people are playing with note taking. So I can't tell you how to do this. It's totally your choice, up to you. But I will say this when it comes to notes. Two things. First, note taking shouldn't be something that happens in parallel with the learning. It's not something you do while you're learning. Note taking is part of the learning. So how do we take it as something you're doing while we're going through this and make it more something part and parcel that it is as much a part of anything else we're doing as me talking to you or us doing an activity. So this isn't a parallel activity. This is part of the learning. And again, I don't know how you want to use it, but I will say this with notes. There are two kind of flavors of notes human beings can take. The first are called shallow notes. So this is when you just take as much information down as you can. You hear a word, you write a word. You hear a word, you write a word. The other flavor of notes are deep notes. This is when you take notes on ideas, linkages, themes, concepts, meaning. Earlier when I said, when you take notes, you remember that stuff better. That only happens when you're taking deep notes. When you're taking shallow notes, the only thing of importance is the sound and order of the word. You hear it, you write it. You hear it, you write it. The meaning of the words is irrelevant. So if you ever see somebody taking shallow notes, they're not learning much of anything. They're just getting information. And they'll flat out tell you. If you see a kid taking shallow notes, just ask them, hey, what did you learn today? They will flat out say, I don't know. I have to go read my notes. Well, I could have just saved you an hour. We just talked about it here, but whatever. So if we're going to allow notes, when we allow notes, deep notes, this is where we're getting that memory boost. How do we ensure that students are taking deep notes? There's only one way we've ever come up with that guarantees they're going to take deep notes, and it's here. When kids take notes on a computer, a lot of them will try to take shallow notes. A lot of people can talk almost as fast as I can speak. And so you're tempted when you don't have to, but a lot of people when they're on a computer are tempted to try and keep up. There isn't a human being in the world who can use one of these and keep up with me. So long as you're taking notes, pen and paper, by definition, you're already taking deep notes because you're already parsing meaning, deciding what's important, what's not. This is why handwritten notes are scribbly and liney. You're already processing the connections. So the only way we know to ensure kids are taking deep notes is you got to do it by hand. You can take deep notes on a computer. It's just most people are tempted not to. And so that's where that kind of struggle comes into. So note taking, an interesting topic with this kind of listening and speech. Another kind of interesting thing that always pops up when we consider this principle is here. Well, then what about listening to music when we study? I mean, how many of y'all have kids that say, I need tunes when I do my homework? Now, believe it or not, there is an argument to be made for this. I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, but there is an argument. And in fact, we would see it amongst ourselves. So I can't see you guys, unfortunately. My screen only shows me my slides, but maybe you guys can see each other. Raise your hand real fast if you need noise or music when you study. I absolutely do. Now raise your hand if you need silence when you study. What you'll see is we're pretty much evenly split. Some of us need it, some of us absolutely don't. So what I'm about to talk to you about, this isn't a group-wide issue. This is a specific person-by-person issue. For the people who say they need music or noise when they study, and it's not everybody, what we think is going on is a process called stochastic resonance. Now it's a big sounding term, but it's totally simple. All stochastic resonance says is when you inject noise, pure random noise into a system, that noise can glom onto units within that system and start to upregulate them. So here on your screen, you've got a little sine wave. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot some noise into that sine wave. And watch, the noise isn't just going to cut right through the sine wave. The noise gloms onto the sine wave. And now the peaks become higher, the valleys become lower. The noise resonated with the signal and made the signal sharper. Now, just because this is so important, let's play another version of this. So here's an image. Now I'm guessing you all can basically see my image, but she's kind of blown out. Lady Liberty, she's a little too bright. What I'm going to do is let's add some noise to this image. So in this case, I mean visual noise. So remember old TVs when you get between the stations and you kind of get that staticky ant race thing? Let's take a snapshot of that, put it on top of this picture. Watch what happens. Oh, hey, All of a sudden the darks are darker. The contrast enhances. Noise made the picture sharper. Well, cool. If adding one layer of noise makes this picture sharp, then surely adding 3 layers of noise is going to make this thing high def. Let's see what happens. Oh, now it's too noisy and we're blown out in the other direction. So stochastic resonance, a sweet spot amount of noise injected into a system can upregulate that system. Why does that matter? That's what we think is happening to here. When we listen to music, our brain can convert that into noise, assign it to our attention network, and actually make our attention network work better. We can sustain focus longer. We can block out distractions easier. Noise makes the system stronger. But there are 2 important caveats to this. One is here, as I said, this is wildly individual. The amount of noise you need ain't going to be near the amount I need. It's going to be way too much for somebody else. So this isn't a group-wide thing. This is a kid-by-kid thing. This is why if you've ever played music to an entire class, half the kids love it, half the kids hate it. It's always a wash. This is a person-by-person thing. And it's a context-by-context thing. The amount of noise I need while doing emails, totally different than the amount I need when doing math or when doing an equation or something like that. So you've got to ride this. It's a knife's edge. You've got to ride this very like situation by situation. More importantly, though, the second caveat is here. This only works so long as the music you're listening to is highly predictable to you. So believe it or not, it doesn't matter if it has lyrics. Like I've got a Metallica CD. It's loud, it's abrasive, it's got words, but I've heard it thousands of times. As soon as I hit play and let it roll out, I know every note that's about to come. Because it's so predictable, my brain will turn it into noise, assign it to my attention, off I go doing my thing. But if I got my iPad on shuffle, and every 2 or 3 minutes I'm going, ooh, that's good. Oh, haven't heard that. Ooh, thumbs up. Or I'm like singing along, tapping. Is this noise anymore? Now it's a signal. It's drawing my attention, and now my learning goes down. So this is a real fine game you got to play. If you're going to do this, it has to be music that's highly predictable to you. And you'll know it's working when you don't hear the music. Like you put on a CD and you're like, oh, I can't wait for track 3. And the next thing you notice, it's already track 10. You're like, what the hell just happened? You were in stochastic resonance. It wasn't a signal to you, it was just noise. But again, if you ever see a kid like dancing or jiving to it, that's not stochastic resonance. Now you're multitasking, you're starting to harm your learning. So I just wanted you to know there is an argument for this. How you choose to play that is completely up to you. In my classroom, you've got 1 strike. I explain this to everyone. You've got 1 go at this, but if I ever see you play with that thing, even 1 time, you've shown me you don't understand the process, it's done. That's it with me. But again, everyone to each their own. Last but not least, somebody asked me this the other day, so I just wanted to throw it in here. So we're talking kind of about reading and listening. What about reading digital versus hard copy? Is there a difference in comprehension and understanding reading on a screen versus paper? And what do we think? Of course there is, absolutely. It turns out if it's short, say 3 pages or fewer, there's no real difference. PDF it, have a good time. Once you get up past 3 pages, hard copy trumps digital. Now, unfortunately, I don't have time to explain to you why. There is a mechanism, but it has to do with space. Everything we learn in this world comes stamped with a 3-dimensional location where it happened. Printed out stuff, there's a clear 3-dimensional location that will never change. The word right will be on the top right page of that about a quarter of the way through this booklet till this burns into dust. That will always be in the same exact spot. On a screen, things don't have a clear location. The same word will go from the bottom of the screen into the middle, out the top. It doesn't ever have a location. So an entire aspect of your memory is gone. So a good rule of thumb when it comes to reading, print it out. The first thing my new college students need to invest in is a printer. I know it sucks, but if you can print it out, you will always remember better. You will always comprehend stronger because of the spatial issue when it comes to computers versus text. Now, real quick, before we move into our next principle, I just want to point this out. So if we're thinking about texts and handouts and slides, we shouldn't be putting words up there, but what does work? You guessed it, images. People can listen to someone talk while looking at images just fine. The 2 will never clash. In fact, you get what's called sensory integration. So when you listen to somebody speak while looking at images, notice, now this is the same brain we were seeing earlier. It's just a little deeper in. That's why it looks weirder. But notice we don't have any overlap on the sound areas, no overlap in the language areas, but what we do get is a huge overactivation of what are called sensory integration areas. Sensory integration boosts comprehension and retention. So simple example, if I read you a list of words today, next week say, how many do you recall? Most of you get about 10%. If instead of saying words, I showed you pictures of those words. So instead of saying table, I said, you look at a picture of a table, up to 35%. But if I said the word while you looked at the picture, table, while you looked at it, That'll jump up to about 65% next week. So it's more than the 10 plus the 35. You get this bonus 20% to your memory. Why? It's that sensory integration issue. So speech and images work great together. Now, a couple of rules. One image at a time, fine. Dozens of images at a time, not good. You have to think about images kind of like you're sharing a family photo album. You have to go one at a time. We can only process one image at a time. If I threw all my photos on a table and said, there was our vacation to Cancun, you can't, what am I supposed to do with this stuff? You've got to do one at a time is kind of how we work images. And another interesting thing, just specifically about PowerPoint, there's a huge chunk, like 40 to 60% of your students who will completely ignore the top 10% of your slides and the bottom 10%. We don't know why this happens. I happen to be one of them. It's if you put things in the top or bottom of your slides, I just never looked there. We think the reasoning has to do with books. Oh, my books are over there. I'm in a hotel. But so every book, right? It has kind of the title of the book on the top, page number on the bottom. You think people have just gotten real good at ignoring that. Like we don't turn the page and go, Game of Thrones. Yeah, I'm still reading that. Cool. We've learned to just kind of block that out. We think a lot of people have taken that into slides. So if we're doing images, whatever we're doing, we're just kind of crunching the middle. It's the only way to make sure people are kind of focusing on it. And last but not least, I just want to point this out. If you're in a field like science or math, and we have to deal with charts, graphs, statistics, these do not work like normal images. The reason why you can process this image while listening to me speak is because it has a gist. You don't have to look at everything. You can look at one leaf, extrapolate, within 0.2 of a second, you have this whole thing. Cool, it's trees on a mountain, got it. Charts, graphs, tables, by their definition, they don't have a gist. If you want to make sense of this, you need to know the specifics. You need to know every number, every line, every word if you want to make any sense of this. So that means if you're in a field where you have to deal with these kinds of things, they don't work like normal images. People cannot make sense of a graph while listening to you speak over it if we have to do both simultaneously. So if we're in those fields, how do we get around that? That's where the point in PowerPoint comes in. That's the entire reason this whole thing exists. All we have to do is help walk attention through it. I don't need you focused on all this. I just need you looking here right now. Or don't worry about this graph. We're just looking at this one thing right now. Or better yet, I'm going to just build it as I talk about it. Here's this thing, then here's this thing, here's this thing. So because graphs and tables are different, we just have to think of a different way. How do I guide your attention through that? Whereas normal images, I can just throw it up and you're going to be just fine with that. So that is principle number one. Written text and the spoken word do not mix. Let's hit another principle. Our next principle has to do with memory. So, okay, we're talking about learning, we're talking about memory. So question, what does a moment or an event or a fact have to have if you want to form a deep memory for that thing? So what does a moment have? What is the one key ingredient you need to form a deep memory for anything? I'm guessing if you're on anything like us right now, a lot of you are thinking emotions, right? Like if something is emotional or highly personal, boom, you're going to make a big old memory for it. If something is kind of neutral, boop, you're going to make a little baby memory. Now that's kind of true. Like there is certainly some truth to that, but it can't be the big secret. Otherwise, tell me, why then do you know this? I'm loving it. I don't think any of you are emotionally invested in the McDonald's I'm loving it jingle. And if you don't like that, just think of all the radio jingles we've heard through our childhood that we still know to this day. AM, PM, mini market. None of us care about this stuff. I don't go home and put that on my speakers and jam out to it. So here are examples of things we've got incredibly deep memories for that are totally unemotional. So emotions can't really be the big trick. So, okay, if we assume everything gets into the brain then about the same, what do you think our next theory was? It must just be pure repetition, right? See it again, memory will get bigger. See it again, memory gets bigger. Just keep shoving that thing into your brain time and time again, memory will get bigger, bigger, bigger. Now, again, that's kind of true. Like there is certainly some truth to that, but it can't be the big secret. Otherwise, tell me, without cheating, which of these logos is accurate? Now, this is something you have repeated ad nauseum. You've put this image into your brain time and time and time again. So which one is it? And why is it that almost no one notices that it is none of those? It looks like this. So here, and if you did that one just fine, just try and draw a coin or a dollar bill from memory. You're not even going to be close. So here are examples of things we have repeated ad nauseum, yet nobody's got a deep memory for. So pure repetition can't be the big secret. It turns out when it comes to memory, we've always been looking in the wrong spot. We've been so focused on how information goes into the brain that we kind of miss the big secret. You want a deep, durable, lasting memory. Certainly has a little bit to do with how it goes in, absolutely, but it has a lot more to do with how you take it out. Access a memory, and that memory gets bigger. Access it again, and that memory gets bigger. Memory is constructive. The more you access, pull out, utilize memories, the deeper, more durable, easier to access in the future these memories become. So our next principle is here. Recall is key. We call this concept recall. The key to deep, durable, lasting memories is recall, ripping the information out rather than finding new ways to put it back in. The reason why we remember radio jingles so well isn't because we've heard them a million times. It's why? Because we've sung them a million times. And every time we hum along to a new song or sing the McDonald's thing when we go in, that memory is just getting deeper, deeper, deeper. The reason why we don't remember logos so well isn't because we haven't seen it. It's because when was the last time anyone asked you to rip that information out? It's in here. It's just so small and hard to get to. But if you did it all the time, boom, it'd be easy. Recall is key. Think about it like this. How many of our students love this type of question? All right, multiple choice. Why do we love this so much? Because we don't got to do any work, man. It's just look at it, see what resonates, off you go. Does this type of question do much to boost memory? Not a whole heck of a lot. If you want to turn this into a memory boosting question, what do you have to do? And how many of our students hate this type of open-ended question? But believe it or not, the work that goes into answering that is the thing that activates the memory machinery, is the thing that makes that memory deeper. So recall becomes everything. Bringing this back to us, this we can start to kind of think about this in terms of warm-ups. How are we starting class? What's that first 5-minute chunk? Rather than just grading homework or looking ahead, can we use that as a recall? Instead of just saying, hey, what do we, or showing you what we learned yesterday, can we start to bring that back online through their work? Bring that online, make it deeper, and now we start to push forward. When it comes to group questioning, a lot of times when we ask questions of a class, we're going to clarify who we're asking the question of, and in which case only one person really has to do recall. Like, all right, Tanya, tell me, what is this? Is there ways we can question that forces everyone to do recall? So even if it's just moving the name to the end of the question. All right, so the question is, what's the capital of Germany? Philippe, you go. So in that way, I ask the question first. Everyone has to, everyone has to kind of come up with an answer before we tuck into it. Everyone has to do that recall before I pick out who we're going. Or extension. You guys know more about questioning than we ever will, but just know, how do we get it recall from everyone rather than individual people when we go through this questioning? Post-session notes. Rico, this is one of the reasons why I don't take notes during my class. Not only can't you pay attention, but now when we take group notes at the end, what do you have to do? It's now a recall thing. You tell me, what did we learn today? I'm trying to play both of these things together at the end of class. And with students, when they study, a lot of our kids will study by doing what's called passive review. They're going to reread their notes. They're going to rewatch a lecture. They're going to reread a book chapter. Anytime you put the information back in, is that great for memory? It's not bad, but it ain't doing much. What do you got to be doing? Got to help them recognize that they need to be ripping it out. Quiz yourself. Take a practice exam. Do some flashcards. Debate somebody. Teach it to somebody. Anything to get you ripping it out. That's where you're getting the bang for your buck when you study. It's not the putting it back in. It's to try and pulling it out. I'll skip the open book quizzes stuff for now because we just want to go into the next principle. So that's principle number 2. Our next principle then is here. So I want to start our next principle with a quick video. So all you got to do is watch this video and try your best to follow along. Here we go. All right, how many of y'all got 10? Sweet, let's crank it up a notch. Anyone for 20? Now, you know this had nothing to do with counting. How many of y'all missed this? Fair enough. But how many of y'all missed this from the first clip? And how many of y'all were just waiting for a gorilla to come walking through? That's why I had to pick a new video. A lot of people know that. But here we go. So that color changing stall, that's off to the side. That's neither here nor there. Who cares? But that basketball hoop, I have a machine in my lab called an eye tracker, so I can see where people look when they do this kind of video. Guess where 100% of you were looking as soon as that basketball hoop disappeared? Boom. We all looked right at it. And if you know the gorilla video, guess where 100% of people look as soon as a gorilla comes on the screen? Boom, right at it. We all look directly at these things, but most of us never see it. Why? Our next principle starts here. We remember only what we pay attention to. Attention is everything when it comes to memory. Attention is our gateway. So the best way to think of attention is kind of like a filter, right? There's too much stuff bombarding our brain at any one time. So we set up this filter. That filter determines what's relevant, makes it into our conscious awareness. What's irrelevant gets blocked out. So in this case, we set our goal. Our goal was what? Count the football being thrown. That's relevant. That makes it in. Even though we're looking right at the basketball hoop, it comes into our brain. It's deemed irrelevant. It's blocked out by our attention filter. So attention is everything when it comes to learning and memory. But there's a second part to this, and it's here. Now, I want to play another quick game with you. So on your screen right now is an image. Now, I'm hoping you've never seen this image. So what I want you to do is set your filter, your attention filter. I'm going to change something about this image. All you got to do, as soon as you see what it is I've changed, point to it on your screen. Here we go. There. Boom. Did you see it? What was it? Whoops. Everything's going haywire. It's just those suns appearing and disappearing. Awesome. Sweet. So let's play the same game again. On the next slide, I'm going to put up another new image. You've never seen it before. All it's going to do is go back and forth just like this. Same exact game as before. Just point to what's changing in this picture here. Uh-oh. Now, I promise you, it's not a small change. In fact, you might say it is a fairly mountainous change. Yes, it is that giant mountain appearing and disappearing in front of this woman's face. So wait a second, why was that so dang hard? Y'all had no problems with this. Here it was just suns, but this one, why did things become so dang tricky? You probably got it. It has to do with that white flash, right? Here, every time the picture changes, it's just picture, 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 picture. Here, every time it changes, white flash, white flash. Now that flash must be doing something to us. Now, just because I think these are so much fun, play again. What's changing in this picture here? Give you a hint, it's not hidden out around the edges. You might say it is smack dab right in the middle of the picture. Yes, it is that giant boat appearing and disappearing. So what's going on? So it turns out every time that flash comes on, your brain registers that as a threat or an uncertainty or an unknown. And anytime your brain senses an unknown, the first thing it does is it dumps all incoming information. About the last half second of whatever the heck you were just doing gets tossed for good. You don't make a baby memory, half memory, it's gone. Why? Why, when your brain senses an unknown, would it just dump all information? Think about it, it's a safety mechanism, right? Because if you're doing something and then the big bear's coming at you, do you really want to be like, oh, give me a second, bear, let me just form a memory for that, and off I go? No, your brain's like, whatever you're doing is irrelevant. I need you focused over here. So that's what's going on here. Every time that flash comes on, you just keep dumping, you just keep resetting what you were doing, and you have to find a different strategy because your brain literally is just forgetting what's going on. So that brings us back to our principle. We remember only what we pay attention to. Oh, but it is incredibly fragile. We are dumping information left and right. It is a very dirty system. Now, why does any of this matter? I don't think any of us are ever going to teach a class with like a strobe light behind us and be like, hey, kids, why aren't you learning anything? What's going on here? It's like, who cares with this white flash? Nothing's happening. Here's where this comes good. I want to play a quick game with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my timer for 10 seconds. Now, when I say go, you're going to have two jobs for me. So if you have a pen and paper, you can do that. You don't have to. You can also just use your finger and write on your palm, or you can write on your knee or the tabletop. That's fine. When I say go, the first thing I want you to do is write out the first 12 letters of the alphabet as quickly as you can. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L. When you're done doing that, I then want you to write out the first 12 numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I'm going to give you 10 seconds to see if you can do all of that. 12 letters, then 12 numbers, or let's see how far along the process you can get. All right, here we go. And ready, set, go. stop. All right. So how'd you do? Now, if you're like most people, you did pretty good. Either you finish or you were getting pretty close, like 7, 8, 9, you were almost there. Perfect. All right. Let's play the same game again. 10 seconds, 12 letters, 12 numbers, except this time, instead of writing the letters and then the numbers, I want you to jump between the two. So first, I want you to write the letter A, then the number 1, then the letter B, then the number 2. Same thing. We're just doing 12 letters, 12 numbers. All we're doing is jumping. 10 seconds. Let's see what happens this time. All right. And ready, set, go. Stop. And how'd you do that time? Now, if you're like most people, you didn't get anywhere near as far that second time. Like most people only get about 2/3 of the way through this time. But more importantly, how many of y'all started to get a bit confused? Like, look, it's just letters and numbers. But by the time you get up to E, all of a sudden you're going, A, B, C, D, E, E, F, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G. So why was that so difficult? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the wonderful world of multitasking. You can't do it. No human being in the world can do it. Multitasking is not a software issue. It's a hardware issue. It's not a skill issue that I can get better at this. It is a brain issue. So remember, anytime we do a task, we have to set up what's called our attention filter that determines what's relevant gets into our brain, what's irrelevant gets blocked out. Problem, you've only got one attention filter slot in your brain. It's a little nugget here behind your right eye. So this means if you ever want to do two things at once, you simply cannot do them together. The brain doesn't have the juice for it. The best you can do is jump quickly back and forth between them. Now, every time you jump tasks, you have to take out the old filter, put in the new one. Take that filter out, put in the new one. That switch takes time, about 0.2 seconds, during which time your brain will go black. It processes absolutely nothing. That's why you were going slower. Every time you jumped letters and numbers, you were losing 0.2 of a second. But more importantly, every time you switch out that attention filter, guess what else your brain does? White flash, white flash. Anytime you switch out your attention filter, your brain assumes whatever you were just doing must have been irrelevant, and it dumps about a half second, the last half second, whatever you're just doing. No memory, no baby memory. It's gone for good. When you multitask, we go slower. Our accuracy drops and our memory tanks significantly. I'm not even going to pull this punch. Are you ready? Multitasking is the single worst thing human beings can do for learning and memory. I'm not even pulling that anymore. Now, to be fair, there are two things most people say at this point. One is, well, I multitask all the time. Like, check it out. Or like this morning, I drove while singing along to the radio. Yes, we can multitask. We do it all the time. But when I'm driving, singing along to the radio, what is interesting about one of those tasks? For those of you who were in the first session, you'll know it's on bottom up. You can do two things together so long as one is on bottom up autopilot. You can only consciously focus on one thing at a time. So when I'm driving and singing, what am I focused on? The singing, my vocals. The driving is just happening. I don't even know what's going on. I'm practicing my work. And I know this because as soon as I need to find a house number or a parking spot, what's the first thing I do? Turn off the radio, focus back on the driving. So you can do two things at once so long as one of those things is on autopilot. You can only consciously focus on one thing at a time. And the other thing that people often say is, and some of you might be thinking this right now, well, sure, they can't multitask, but I can. Like, you don't know. You haven't seen me at my best. I'm good. And that's totally fine, man. If you still think you can do it, that's awesome. But you should know, if you still think, even after all of this, that you can multitask, there's every chance you are one of the worst multitaskers on this call right now. We see it all the time. The people who think they're great at it always do worse than everyone else. It's the people who know they're bad at it that can kind of temper it. We're all bad. No one's doing it well. But some people can temper it a bit by knowing it. It's the people who have no clue what's going on are the ones who always do worse with it. And that's where it gets really scary. Until students directly learn this process, most of them think they're killing it. The more you think you're killing it, the worse you're doing at it. So what does that mean for us? Go back to kind of thinking about teaching. A lot of the times we teach too much, or we have too many strategies or rules or instructions going at once. This is where sequencing and scaffolding really comes in. How are we keeping focused on one step at a time, one idea at a time? How are we building a unified concept one step at a time rather than multiple steps simultaneously? When we're working, The brain hates unfinished work. This is multitasking at its finest. Is if you start a story and then go into a different realm, I'm going to try and hold that story in this bit till you come back to give me a finish. And now I'm going to be jumping back and forth to listening to your new story while trying to maintain, I got to remember to ask this question and I got to remember to ask this. So how are we making sure we complete ideas before moving on to the newest ones? And I'm the worst at this one, so apologies. It's hard to do. When our kids study, can they go short, sharp, highly focused? The joke is, with kids, give me 50 minutes of focused study. 25 on, go take a breather, 25 on. No multitasking, no computers, no nothing. You just sit down and work. 50 minutes of focused study, you will remember up to 30 to 70% more than if you studied that same material for 4 hours while multitasking. 50 minutes versus 4 hours, and you get up to a 70% boost. Why? All because you're playing the system, the machine, it's the way it's meant to be played. And think about tech. Tech, by its very definition, begs people to multitask. So if we're going to use tech, and we can talk about this another time, tech has been horrible for learning. 3.5 decades of data show that when we use tech, learning goes down. And the biggest reason for it is when kids use tech, they multitask. They got 10 tabs up. Some of you are doing it right now. That's fine. But good rule of thumb, once you start multitasking, the learning is over. You might as well just get up and leave. It's not happening no more. So if we're going to use tech, we got to think our way through it and make sure focus becomes everything. When kids sit down to use a computer for homework, on average, they're making it 6 minutes before they start multitasking, which means they're done. And when they do live sessions like this at the start of COVID, they were making it about 15 minutes. By the end of the second lockdown in Melbourne, it was 2 minutes. And again, it's nothing wrong with computers. It's just that kids multitask on them. So as soon as we're like, stop multitasking, I need you to learn at this. Yeah, they'll do it for about 6 minutes, and then they go right back to their normal patterns. And that's the truth. So if we're going to use tech, we got to figure out how to keep everything focused on tech. Now, our last principle then for the day is going to be here. I'm going to finish with an old psych story. So this is a story from an old physiology textbook. From the 1800s. My wife got it for me for Christmas one year, and I read it. I know, I'm so cool. But it told this really awesome story about this delivery man. So we're in the 1850s. It's the US. We've got this delivery man. He's got this really expensive package he has to deliver, but it's hot. It's noon. It's the 1800s. So he decides, I'm going to go tie one on instead. Now, he ends up drinking a little too much, passes out. Wakes up the next day sober. He's feeling fine, but guess what he can't find? That package. He has no clue where he put it. So he's going around town trying to retrace the steps. He said by the end of the day, he's got like 5 of his bosses. They're all looking for this thing. Nobody can find it. Guess what they did to jog his memory? Got him drunk. As soon as he was drunk, he was able to walk him right where he left it the night before. So what do we learn from this man? Not that drinking is good for memory. We learn that memory is contextual. We like to think that when we learn stuff, we learn it clean. We don't. Right now, your memory for the session isn't going to be my words. It's going to be my words mixed with the feeling of the chair against your body. Whatever temperatures in the air right now, whatever you might be smelling or hearing, internal, if you're hungry, if you're sad, if you're sleepy, if you're excited, all of this will get tied up with your new memory and will determine how you can access this memory in the future. So a good example of this was back in '75. A researcher sent a team of deep sea divers about 30 meters underwater, and he had them memorize a list of words. Just do a memory game. Cool. The next day, he had all of them come back. Half of them went back underwater. Half of them he kept on dry land. And he said, how many words do you remember from yesterday? The divers that went back underwater, where they had first learned it, 35% more recall than the divers who stayed on dry land. No one was paying attention to the water. It's not like we were consciously paying attention to where am I learning this. It just got baked into the learning. And when you returned to that context, it was easier to access that learning. So think about it like this. When the military trains for combat, do they do it like this? Like we're going to do 10 hours of Call of Duty a day, and then we're going to be 6 months, we're going to be ready for combat. Yay. Heck no. How does the military train for combat? High tension, high stress, live ammo. Why do they train like this? Because what's a war situation like? High tension, high stress, live ammo. What they're doing is they're building context into the learning. So when they hit that context in the future, it's more easy for them to access and utilize that learning. So take this back to a lot of what we do. Now, here's where we start to see if we're doing multiple exposures of ideas, of things, if we're thinking of sequencing, how do we continue to come back to ideas and either build context in or pull context out? It's just something interesting for us to think about. But for students, especially when they're studying, how many of our students are going to study like this? Like not exactly like this, but I mean, they're comfortable. They got their soda pop, their stuffy animal, their music. In this instance, are they going to be learning? Of course they're going to be learning, but where are they tying that learning to? This bed. Now when they have to go sit in a quiet room and take a test with a straight back chair and some kids coughing on them, can they easily access all this? It's not that they didn't learn it, it's they tied it to the wrong context and made it so hard for them to access in a different context. So if you know how you need to perform, we tie our context to the outcome. If I knew I had to take a test in that chair tomorrow, I'm doing all my studying in that chair. I'm going to spray the same cologne every day. I'm going to drink the same Coke. So when I get on the day and I have my Coke and smell my, boom, all the memories come back. I'm off. I'm good to go. Now, sometimes we don't have a specific reason to learn something like basketball. I don't want to just be good at basketball there. I want to be good everywhere. So how should I be practicing my basketball? Here's where you pull context out. Practice in as many different contexts as you can. Practice outside, upstairs, downstairs, when it's raining, when it's cold, when it's night, when it's hot, when it's daytime. Practice in as many different contexts as you can to start stripping context away. And you can build a more freely movable standalone skill. The only similarity between all of them will now become a more transferable skill. So go back to the divers. If I had the divers study 4 different times in 4 completely different locations, like study the words underwater, then on land, then in a swamp, then in a mountain. And now I tested them in a brand new location that no one's ever seen before. I'm going to test you in midair. They're going to do a lot better because they've tried to pull context away. Whereas if we did 4 study sessions underwater and now we went to this new context, it's going to be a lot harder. So memory is contextual. Where are we building context into or stripping context out of repetition and the learning we're trying to do? All right, so that brings us up to the end of this session. A quick review of what we've seen. We saw 4 big principles today. First, written text, spoken word, do not mix. We took a look at what does that mean for, say, slide design, handout design, took a look at note taking, took a bit of a look at listening to music while we studied, which go back to the context then. For people who need music when they study, it might help us focus when we study. But if I have music when I study and I don't have it during a test, I've just created a contextual jump. I now need to overcome this. So you will take a contextual hit. It's just, so here's where you get to marry it up. Some kids I know won't study at all without music. So I'd rather you study with music and have a contextual hit later than have nothing. But with that said, music is the one thing that's easy to mimic. So our brain does not differentiate between what we think and what we do. When we think of something, our brain acts as though we're doing it. That's how learning works. So if I listen to the same music every time I study, now I'm sitting in a test, all I have to do is start thinking of that music, hum it to myself, whatever the heck it is. That will be enough to activate, and now I can overcome that contextual hit. So there are ways around this, just interesting stuff there. We also took a look at images and text, spoken word do mix just fine. And we saw that images do not count, excuse me, graphs, tables, charts do not count. That's a different thing than regular images that we have to guide people through. We saw that recall is key. Memory is constructive. The more you access, pull out of memory, the deeper it becomes. So where are we building recall into our class, into our study? We saw multitasking, the single worst thing for learning a memory. No one can do it. So how are we sequencing things in a straight manner and helping, or at least making sure students try to help themselves to not do this when they're at home? And last but not least, we saw memory is contextual. Where are we baking it in? Where are we pulling it out? Now, one last thing, I just want to give you a quick shameless plug here. So we've been looking at the science of learning. If you find this stuff interesting and you think, yeah, I want to keep digging into this, I just want you to know that I built another program, a whole program called the Learning Blueprint. It's pretty much everything I've sussed together in the last 15 years about learning into a sequence that we can start to use as teachers. So I just want you to know that that exists as another resource you might want to tap into. So you can look it up on a website or just shoot me an email if you want to talk about it or anything. I'm pretty easy on email. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for hanging out. I'm happy to do some question and answers if anyone's got any thoughts. But I guess if you have to disappear, Zoom, I probably won't even notice. But if you want to stick around and ask questions, I'm all yours. So thank you guys for hanging out with me.
A few people have asked if there are additional resources or other support that you can kind of send them to.
Yeah, if you, so that course is the big one. If you want, that's a full on, that's a tank. You're going to learn everything about learning. But if you're just really interested in these principles, I'll type it. If you go into the chat, not my last book, the one before that is called Stop Talking, Start Influencing. It was originally called Stop Talking, Start Teaching, but the publisher changed it. But so that's 12 chapters. Each chapter is one of these learning principles. So there's more and it says, if this is the principle, how does it work? How can we apply that? So if you're really just interested in these principles, that's a book that you can kind of tap into. Also, if you go onto my YouTube, go onto I think it's at Jared Cooney or at Jared, but I have a YouTube where every couple of weeks I put up a new video that translates some new research that says, if the research says this, what does that mean for us as teachers? It's been a year since I posted a new video just because I'm working on a big project, but there's tons of old ones. So if you just more principles like that, that's another resource you can kind of tap into as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for everything. This has been amazing. I even have been sitting here and listening to the whole thing. So that is great. I love it. Yeah, I didn't move.
You were thinking you were going to go do some work. You're like, sweet, I got the morning.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I'll get it started, and then I'll wander off and do my thing. But no, I didn't budge. So this is fascinating. I appreciate everything.
No, thank you guys so much. And hopefully we can keep working together in the future. It's great getting a chance to meet all of you guys, albeit digitally.
Thank all of you for coming. The next session will start at 11:20. For session 3 in this particular room will be students, law education, and your success, improving behavior and academic outcomes. Dr. Horvath, I have to say goodbye to you. I'm so sad. I thought I was going to have you all day.
That was it. They just wanted to. Next year, we'll do more.
Oh yeah, sign me up with you, or I'll do your room again.
I love it. Thanks, Kathy. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. You guys have a fabulous day.
Can we ask that he sends those links before he leaves, please?
Let's see. Where did he put it? He just put a couple of things. Stop talking, start influencing. And Dr. Horvath, are you still here? I think he may have already left. He did say he has a YouTube that you might be able to go find.
I'm going to have to track him down. If anybody has
sorry. Yep,
if anybody has any of those links that he put in there.
I didn't actually see